This is the Guns Magazine podcast, episode number 43. Hi there, and welcome to the Guns Magazine podcast. I'm your host and the editor of Guns Magazine, Brent Wheat. Thanks for joining us as we talk to the interesting people who make up the world of shooting, hunting, and the firearms industry. Before we get started, let's talk about Kimber Firearms, our sponsor. Kimber was founded with the singular purpose of making every firearm the best it can possibly be, with a fit and finish that only practiced hands can achieve and appreciate. Whether you carry a Kimber for personal protection, hunting, or competition, know that their promise of quality without compromise is how they measure success. To learn more about Kimber Firearms, visit kimberamerica.com. Today, we're talking politics with Guns Magazine 2A defense columnist Dave Workman. Dave's a professional journalist with decades of experience, and he's been on the front lines of the Second Amendment battle for years. In today's episode, we discuss the likely consequences of a Joe Biden victory in November, what to do about rioters, and most importantly, what gun owners need to do to prevent a Biden victory. Now here's my wide-ranging political chat with journalist Dave Workman. Good afternoon, Dave. How are you?
Well, I'm sneaking by. We've got September 1 is coming up as we speak, and I'm looking forward to a good fall hunting season. But I'm also looking ahead toward what is liable to turn into just a bare knuckles election season.
Well, I was going to say, that's when you were saying a good fall season, we're all looking forward to the outdoors, but we're certainly not looking to the political season because it's going to be ugly, and that's why we're talking to you. You follow politics very closely, and you write on it, report on it, and I felt like it was probably time to check in with you again. You've been a guest on the Guns Magazine podcast before, but as we're down to just a few weeks before the election, it's getting serious here, so we need to talk about some things. I guess the big question over the top is, what happens if Biden wins?
Well, I think that's a foregone conclusion that if the United States gun owner wants to know what happens across the country if Joe Biden wins, all you got to do is look what happened in Virginia this year.
Yeah.
After the legislature was thrown over to Democrats last November, and that was because too many voters kind of sat it out and didn't bother to return a ballot.
Yep.
And what happened down there should be alarming to any gun owner in the United States, because Joe Biden really has already telegraphed what he's going to do. I wrote a piece about this at AmmoLand, I think, here a couple of days ago, about his agenda. You can find his agenda online, Joe Biden's gun agenda, and it's 3,400 words of terror for American gun owners. It really is. And of course, Kamala Harris is on board with all of this. And Biden last year, or maybe it was earlier this year, down in Dallas, he got Beto O'Rourke up on a stage with him in front of a big audience and said that he was going to make O'Rourke his policy man on guns. And everybody remembers Beto. Hell yes, we're going to take your AR-15 O'Rourke.
Yep. He kind of let the kitty out of the bag on that one, didn't he?
Yeah, there's really no wiggle room with these guys. They want absolute strict gun regulation, if not prohibition. And I think it's one step after the other until they achieve what they're after. And I'm serious. I really think they want to turn the Second Amendment right to keep and bear arms into a government-regulated privilege.
Yeah, I would agree, and I would hope any educated gun owner would likewise agree. An interesting thing is, for years, my position on gun control has been, if the Democrats finally consolidate power, that they will slowly move in the direction of gun control, because I think they realize that it would really create a lot of social problems. But I've got to say, maybe I'm wrong. Looking at the way the country is now and the way the Democratic Party is now, I'm not so sure that like day 1 or 2, there might not be some pretty far-reaching executive orders, and I'm afraid of what would happen if that happens. Do you think they're dumb enough to really go after, say, modern sporting rifles or handguns or whatever, like before the ink's even dry on the inaugural proclamation?
Well, they'll probably wait 24 hours because, Joe Biden does like a good party, and he'll be going to several of them if he wins the election. But I think within 24 to 48 hours, we would see some kind of executive action. Harris has already said that if she doesn't see action from Congress within 100 days of taking office, if she became president, and let's not mark that likelihood completely out of the question, because there was a recent poll from Rasmussen that said 57% of the people don't think Biden will complete a full term if he's elected, and that would make Harris the president of the United States. So she would give Congress 100 days to act, and if they didn't act, she'd start taking executive action.
Yeah,
and I think they would go after modern sporting rifles, and the reason I think that is because they're convinced that the average American gun owner is a lethargic guy who sits around on a couch all day long, does all of his talking on the internet, and he won't go out to vote. And that is worrisome to me, because once you lose the right to keep and bear arms, you're not getting it back.
Never, ever.
Gone.
Yep. So circling back to the question, though, do you think they're dumb enough to really make hardcore action? Do they think that there will be no dangerous backlash if Kamala Harris or Joe or whomever suddenly says, look, after November 1, modern sporting rifles, mandatory buyback, and we're going to send the police after you? Do you think that they would actually go that far?
They might. And the reason I say that is because they don't think anybody's going to fight back, and they know they've got most of the mainstream media on their side on this issue. I think what they are ignoring or forgetting maybe is that they would have to deploy the military, and the military, I don't think, is going to put up with it. Years ago, this has been over 20 years ago, because I wrote a story about it. There was a survey, a study done by a naval officer down at 29 Palms. This thing became famous. And I actually tracked that guy down and interviewed him. And what he found was interesting. This was done with the Marines, and most, but not all the Marines, said that they wouldn't follow an order like that. There are people in the military, at least there were at that time. It was disturbing that they would follow a disarmament order, and that bothers me.
Mm-hmm.
I think that, when you take an oath, and there are a lot of people in this country who have taken that oath, they live by it. And, you can look at social media any day of the week, even on Sundays during church, and you'll find somebody out there saying, I took an oath and I'm not going to go against that oath, and I'm not going to give up my guns. There would be, I think, a whole lot of activity by attorneys, and let's hope that we keep this in the court of law rather than out in the streets, because nobody wants to see that kind of trouble like we've actually seen all summer long with these urban riots over the Black Lives Matter stuff. I think that would be child's play compared to what a real live, honest-to-God civil war would mean in this country. And the people who talk about that stuff on the internet really don't know what they're talking about.
Yeah.
I don't think they've ever seen violence up close and personal. And
no.
I have. I don't want to see it again.
I can't speak for the military. I've got my beliefs because I've talked to a lot of military folks, know a lot of military folks, but I can speak from experience of law enforcement. And what you would see is very few sheriffs in the country would support that kind of legislation because it goes against the Constitution. So you're going to have the county's chief law enforcement officer going against it. You're going to have a lot of police chiefs in democratically controlled areas saying they're going along with it. But it is my belief in my heart that the vast majority of local and state law enforcement officers would just say no. They're not going to do it because it's an unconstitutional order. So now we've got a situation where you got agencies pitted against each other. You've got, the county sheriff versus the local police. You've got the local police versus their own administration. You've got in democratically controlled states, they're going to order the state police to take that on, and they're in the same boat. Many of their people are going to say this is unconstitutional. It's just a recipe for massive breakdown. And the only way I see preventing that, we got to freaking get out and vote.
Exactly. That's exactly what I was going to say. We have the law on our side, not just the lawmen and the lawwomen out there, the people doing the good work wearing the badge. We've got the law on our side. We've got the Constitution on our side. Not that I really like to feed the bank account of a bunch of attorneys, but we'd keep those guys busy for a very, very long time. And I think in the final analysis, we'd come out ahead. And here's why. For the last 3 years, 3.5 years since Donald Trump took office, he has been very effectively filling vacancies on all the federal courts at all the levels, from the district all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court, with constitutional conservative judges.
Yep.
And we saw recently in California, a 3-judge panel in the Ninth Circuit struck down California's ban on so-called large capacity magazines. They said it violated the Second Amendment. The guy that wrote that opinion is a Donald Trump appointee. And believe me, elections matter.
Yeah. We don't even have to test that theorem if folks will just get out and vote. How often do we have to say that?
Well, I don't know. As you know, of course, because you edit all my stuff, my monthly columns in the magazine, 2A Defense has been focused on getting out the vote for the last 8 or 9, maybe 10 months. And I can never stress enough the importance of being registered to vote and actually casting a vote. I think it was just the last month's column where I talked about some of the stupid excuses people throw at me. I didn't vote because, I forgot. Or, geez, I was gone hunting. Or, I don't want my name on a list. I hear that stuff.
Yeah.
And my opinion of that, some of those people are too stupid to own firearms because they don't want to exercise a basic fundamental right and a responsibility of citizenship. You got to be part of it, or somebody else is going to be calling all the shots for you, and you're not going to like what happens after that.
Yep. And there's another facet here that I think, and unfortunately the Democrats may have a point here, but I've seen it much more in the 2 years I've been the editor now, and that's the concept of the FUD. And for folks that don't know what a FUD is, that refers to Elmer Fudd, the prototypical hunter from the Bugs Bunny movies, which are cartoons, which I don't think we can watch now, even though I've got every one of them on DVD because they're just the high point of animation art. But, a FUD is somebody who stays in his own lane, has a deer rifle, maybe even really supports the Second Amendment, but they think, nobody needs those black rifles or black pistols or whatever because they don't personally use them or own them. And that's the attitude that I do see still so much. Well, I don't own one of those black rifles. Why do I need to even worry about this? And what we can't seem to get across to these folks is any gun. They really, truly, they want all guns. They want your .22 pistol. They want your semi-automatic shotgun. And it's not a far stretch from that point to where Pappy's single-shot 12-gauge in the closet is going to be gone, too.
We have got to make sure that every gun owner in the United States who values the Second Amendment, who values his or her right to have that firearm for whatever purpose, whether it's to hunt, to compete, to plink, to protect your home and your family, you got to get in the game. And yep. This is not one of those situations where you can sit this out and let Larry Jones down the street cast your vote for you. That's not going to work. You've got to be part of this, and especially in the critical states: Wisconsin, Minnesota, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Ohio. Out here in Washington State, the prevailing wisdom is that Seattle's going to dominate the vote. But I'm going to tell you something: if the conservative voters in this state, if the Republican voters all vote as a block, they can take this state back from
really?
These liberals. I think they can, because there are a lot of people who have witnessed what's been going on in Seattle for the last 6 months. And they're not a bunch of happy campers. They're really upset. They're angry at the governor. They're angry at the mayor of Seattle. They really are angry at the Seattle City Council. They see the police embattled in Seattle and elsewhere around the state. They watched a good cop, Carmen Best, who had absolutely nothing with which she and I agree with socially, but she got run out of law enforcement after 28 years of devoted service because the city council wants to, and they tried to, cut the department budget by 50%, cut her salary by 50%. I don't blame her. She said, blow it out your ear, I'm going to retire. Yeah. And she did. And people are not going to forget that between now and November. And I'll tell you why, because I'm going to remind them.
Well, I will be too. That's an interesting thing. I just basically read what I read in the national media, which we know is very skewed. You're right there with all that stuff going on in Seattle and Portland too, kind of right in your lap. I've got some liberal friends I just argued with Saturday, a buddy of mine who is going to be a Biden voter. But when I get on the topic of how do you think defunding the police or doing away with the police, how's that going to work? And they don't have an answer for it. What is the Seattle City Council thinking? Is it purely just pandering to the leftists? Or do they really think this utopia will come true if they get rid of the cops?
No, frankly, I think what is at work is something a lot more sinister.
Okay.
The far left in this country, let's start at the top. They hate Donald Trump. They make up a whole bunch of stuff that becomes their truth about Donald Trump. Mm-hmm. And that's why they hate Donald Trump. I've heard people accuse Donald Trump of stuff that he never did.
He robbed a liquor store the other night. You knew that, right? According to CNN. And some of that stuff just borders on the silly. Mm-hmm. But they've got it in their minds that they've got to remove Donald Trump. So, okay, they put Joe Biden in office. Poor old Joe. He's been around for 47 years. Tell me what he's really accomplished that he's complaining about now that he didn't have the time to fix in those 47 years. I can't think of a thing. And yet all they want really is the power. They want to be able to tell the rest of us how to live our lives. That's really what's going on here. They want to micromanage your life, my life, and the lives of all of our listeners out here, all of our readers. They want to tell us, oh, you can't read Guns Magazine because you're talking about guns. You can't read American Handgunner because, oh my God, that's about handguns. Oh, terrible. And really, that's really what they'd get down to. And then they're starting to step on the First Amendment. When they do stuff like that, they won't want you to read anything you say like by Jack O'Connor or Ernest Hemingway on the hunts. Robert Rourke, any of those guys. All that stuff would be verboten. And the behavior that some of these people have exhibited
it really reminds me of what happened in Germany during the years when they used to have book burnings, and we used to occasionally see a book burning or something here in the United States, and good sound people on both sides of the aisle said, "Hey, wait a minute, you can't do that. We have a constitution in this country. We're all supposed to get along. We follow the same set of rules, the same set of laws, and we can debate without becoming tyrants." And when you use that word tyranny, that could be what a lot of people would be looking at. They're already looking at it in some states. I mean, look at New Jersey. You can't get a permit to carry in New Jersey to save your life. Maryland's the same way. It's very difficult. There are states in which you still have to get a permit to buy a gun, and New Jersey is one of those. So I think in the final analysis, if people don't want to live like that, all they got to do is follow what good old Brent and good old Dave are talking about right now. Register to vote and go out and fill that ballot out. You're not doing it just for you. You're doing it for your neighbors. You're doing it for your kids. You're doing it for your grandkids. Maybe you're doing it for your grandkids you never will live to meet, but you're doing it for them.
It's... Not to use too much hyperbole, but I really do feel like this election is kind of a fight for the soul of our country, because, what we're seeing, especially in these big cities, is almost an insurgency. And the ironic thing that nobody seems to point out, at least among the mass media and progressives, is the group Antifa. That's short for anti-fascists. And who acts more like fascists than anybody in this whole equation? Them. When they had their little free zone, they were basically shaking down the residents. They were shaking down the businesses. They were saying who could say what, who could be there. That sounds like fascism to me, but nobody seems to call them out on it.
Well, that's the problem. We lived through that up here. The city of Seattle is by line of sight about 5 miles from where I'm sitting right now. And on the couple of days when there were riots and disturbances in the chop zone where they actually tried to burn buildings down, we could see smoke.
Wow.
And it's not that difficult to imagine what would happen, what likely will happen if these guys actually do take power. And I'm talking about unbridled, unchallengeable power. And I blame part of that on the media for not reporting some of this stuff as vigorously as they could. And maybe it's because the press is scared of these guys too.
I think that's some of it.
And that's bad, because I'm a journalist. Whatever else I do, I'm a journalist. I've got a degree in journalism. I spent the last 50 years in journalism, and I'm sorry to see what has happened, especially in the broadcast media, where some of these people seem to be living in denial. Now, there was some good reporting during the riots in Seattle, and I know that there are some reporters down in Portland who are trying to tell the whole story down there, but I think there's a little bit of fear, too. They're afraid that these guys might decide to burn down their TV station or something, or picket the station, just take action against individual reporters. And, I understand all of that. Believe me, I do. Fear and anxiety can affect anybody. But at the end of the day, you got to do your job. And even if your job doesn't make people happy, well, too bad. It's still your job. You were in law enforcement. How many times did you really want to arrest somebody? I mean, come on.
Occasionally, I will say.
Well, occasionally.
But it's like you say, though, being the target of people that aren't happy, if you're going to do the job, of a journalist, that kind of goes with it, unless you completely just collapse to the lowest common denominator, and you're letting the bullies win. And I know an awful lot of reporters, especially younger ones, and they're not cut from the same cloth as the reporters of 30 years ago. And I think, number one, a lot of them are very leftist. They, for some reason, they think that's the great, political trend of the future. But a lot of them are just flat scared,
I think you're on to something. I know or have known in my career one or two reporters that carried guns when they were working. They'd have been fired immediately if anybody knew about it. But there's also the fear of job loss. For example, say I was working for one of the TV stations and a guy tried to club me and I decided just to flatten him right there. Mm-hmm. I'd probably lose my job over that. Because unfortunately, all the TV stations now have attorneys and they got to be careful of that sort of thing. And then they're very mindful of lawsuits. But when you reach a point where you are afraid to even defend yourself, we're all in trouble.
But isn't that a great socialist progressive talking point,
Yeah, well, I'm not a socialist or a progressive, so.
No, you look at England and, basically self-defense is a bad thing, and I think that's what these folks are kind of looking for. That I've heard that, I believe it was Seattle, where it wasn't the mayor that, or somebody said that, if people come after you, just surrender your stuff. It's only stuff. Just let them get away with it. And there is a certain validity to that statement, but it was basically just capitulate when you're faced with force. And that just emboldens these people, and that's why a lot of places in this country are literally falling apart.
Well, yeah, as I noted earlier, these people don't expect anybody to fight back. And they have been emboldened by this. When a mayor tells the police chief to tell his or her department, hey, stand down, let these people do what they need to do, let them protest, and if that involves broken windows, well, gee whiz, that's what insurance companies are for. That really does enable these guys to be bigger thugs than they were yesterday.
Yep.
And you mentioned England. Right now, you're talking to the guy who probably caused a bit of an international incident. I was being interviewed one time by the BBC. This was more than 20 years ago. And then I was on the NRA board of directors. So they contacted the one guy in America, the one press guy in America who knew something about guns. This was right when Tony Martin, the farmer who had been in prison, was getting out of prison because he'd shot a couple of burglars. Mm-hmm. And so this guy, I can't even remember his name, probably Ian or something fancy like that. We got to talking about defending your home and stopping a burglar. And he asked me a question. He said, well, what would happen if somebody broke into your house while you were home? And I said, well, they'd probably get shot. And the guy, he said this, and I can remember this like it happened 5 minutes ago. He said, Dave Workman, are you telling me, in perfect British, you'd murder me if I broke into your house? And I took about 2 seconds to gather my thoughts. As well, where I come from, that's not considered murder. It's more of a public service. And that was the end of the interview.
Wow. I think you blew his mind there.
Well, yeah, and I plead guilty. I actually said that on live British radio.
That's wonderful. Well, we've alluded to it a couple of times, and this is a topic that we've been, I guess, kind of controversial to now. We might as well dive in the deep end with both feet, but let's not talk about the NRA per se, but would you agree that they've kind of set this whole thing out? They are too busy focusing on their own demons, and they're not being the force that they have been in the past?
Well, it looks that way, but I've been telling people we're not at Labor Day yet. I think after Labor Day, with the election season really cranking up, it would not surprise me to see the NRA come out swinging. And the reason I say that is because historically, and I wrote this just the other day. Historically, the NRA has always fought best from behind circled wagons. They're famous for doing that. They're famous for surprising the hell out of people. They got the vote out in 2000, which is why Al Gore had to fold up his tent and go home. They got the vote out in 2016, which is why Hillary Clinton did not waltz into the White House. And I think they're going to get the vote out again. And here's why I really think that. The NRA isn't just a building in Fairfax, Virginia. The NRA is millions of gun owners out here, people who think for themselves. They protect their own rights. They think about the rights of their kids. Fortunately, they are really the hardcore gun owners. They understand what's at stake here. And a lot of people who own firearms, who consider themselves members of the NRA, although they aren't dues-paying members, I think that they're going to finally come to it right when they sit down to fill out that mail-in ballot, or when in some states where they open up voting at voting places, they'll go and they'll get into that voting booth and they'll say, you know what, I can't possibly not vote to reelect the president because he's been sticking up for the Second Amendment, and I don't want to see a United States where Joe Biden is in there maybe for two and a half years, long enough to let Kamala Harris take over and then serve 2 terms of her own. I can't imagine that the American gun owners who vote, and I hope they all vote this time, will allow that scenario to happen. It worries me that it might, but my imagination doesn't run clear to the boundaries of the Twilight Zone, so I'm hoping that we don't have to face that prospect.
Yeah. Well, actually, a family member and I got into this argument, and he kept saying, look at the polls, look at the polls. And I just said, well, look at the polls 4 years ago. I actually saw a commentary the other day from one of the mainstream media services, and it was debunking the myth of the silent Trump voter. And it was saying that the current polls are completely accurate, that Biden is just going to win by a landslide. And this writer did everything he could to try and basically wash away the myth that those of us that would support the president are so tired of being berated, belittled, called names, called terrible things. So if some stranger calls and says, you got to vote for Trump, I'm going to hang up. And I think pretty much everybody I've talked to said the exact same thing. So in the end, my feeling is that I think Trump will win. So what are you seeing out in a very mixed area out there in Washington?
Well, I think in Washington state right now, it's a blue state as far as the national vote is concerned, there could be some surprises out here too. The guy that is now going to be running for governor as a Republican, he surprised the hell out of everybody. He set up a grassroots network that this is the police chief from the small city of Republic over in Ferry County. Mm-hmm. He's the first lawman he became nationally famous when he said, hey, you guys just adopted a gun control law in this state by public vote. I'm not going to enforce it because it's unconstitutional. Huh. And the majority of county sheriffs in this state joined in with him, and even some county commissions adopted resolutions where, we're not going to enforce that thing. And right now, that law really is not being enforced.
Really?
And I think that's a good thing. So you translate that into nationwide, what's going on out in the country, and I think you're onto something. I think a lot of Trump voters, people who don't want to maybe be branded with a social stigma or all of that stuff, they're not answering those polls, and the polls were wrong 4 years ago.
Badly wrong. Badly.
And I remember election night when I was watching CNN and MSNBC and Fox News, and I bounce around to all three. I mean, reporters do that because we're all crazy. Yeah. But I watched and I listened not really to what the commentators were saying, because they got to keep talking. That's what they do for a job. But I watched what was going on with the Electoral College votes. Mm-hmm. And about 8:30 my time, which is 11:30 back east, Trump was ahead in the Electoral College by, I think, 50 or 60 votes. And that was not going to change. He had just won Pennsylvania. They had just declared Ohio for him. And I said, I turned the TV off and I went to bed. I said, this thing's over with. And I woke up about 2 o'clock in the morning our time, or maybe it was 1 o'clock in the morning, right about when Trump was coming down the escalator or the stairs, and they were declaring. Everybody was in shock. I looked at MSNBC, and there were some of the commentators who were crying.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. They were losing it.
I thought to myself, well, these guys must have all skipped high school civics, because they forgot about the Electoral College. And popular vote or not, the Electoral College is what saved this country. And all these calls for an end of the Electoral College, there's a reason for that. These guys do not want to have everybody in the country have a say in who is going to be elected. They want the big cities, which typically vote Democrat. They want them to dominate the election. And I say, no, the guy in Des Moines, Iowa, that farmer out there in Nebraska, he's got just as much right to have a say in who becomes the next president as some drunk in New York City.
Yep.
Period. And it was an amazing situation. And I loved every minute of it.
Well, I was going to say, I stayed up all night just mainly to watch those people melt down, because, I'm of the age, as you are too, that I was brought up, the mantra of the reporter was, you kept your personal feelings aside. The new bunch, it's they're aiding and abetting this leftist insurgency, and we have to do something about it. And the best way is, what's that word we keep going back to? Vote.
Vote. You got to vote.
So in the time we've got left, put on your prognostication cap. If Biden wins, what's going to be the first 6 months of what's going to happen to our industry and to our country?
It's going to be a train wreck. I think the economy is going to crash. I think government will be in just tatters. Because I can envision what would happen, or what will happen, if Biden is elected and if the Democrats take full control of Congress. And all you got to do is look at what happened in Richmond, Virginia, like we talked about at the top end of this thing. If anybody thinks that a Biden presidency is not going to affect their constitutional rights, and I'm not just talking about the First or the Second Amendment, I'm talking about the First Amendment too. All I can say to you is you are delusional, and you better seek counseling before November 3rd. That's all the time you have left.
Yep.
And that's my analysis.
Okay, Trump wins. I think a lot of folks believe, like I do, I bet we got 4 more years of turmoil in the streets, at least in maybe the big cities. Do you see that too?
I believe that we're going to have 4 more years of stupid, pointless investigations by Congress. They've spent the last 4 years throwing every kind of roadblock they could in Donald Trump's way to make sure that he could not press his full agenda. And I think that's deplorable. It's a situation where the insiders, the Beltway people, people who've been in Congress for 30 and 40 years, whose only paycheck has ever come from the government. They've never been out in private industry at all. They don't want somebody like Trump in there upsetting the apple cart, and they've done everything that they could think of to interfere with that possibility. So, yeah, I can see turmoil, at least in the summer months. People don't like to ride in the winter because it's cold and it's wet.
Exactly.
And stuff doesn't burn as well. But I can see Capitol Hill Democrats continuing to try to throw stuff in the way of the administration just to prevent him from doing what he wanted to do, which is drain that proverbial swamp.
Exactly. Well, Dave, it's been great talking to you. It's wonderful to hear your insight. I think win, lose, or draw, about the second week in November, we need to get back together and either celebrate or plot what we're going to do next.
Well, you're talking about a conspiracy now, and I don't want to go there.
Well, if we play our cards right, the Democrats will investigate us too. So.
Yeah. And you take good care of yourself, and we will talk soon, I'm sure.
Sounds good. Well, politics simply isn't a pleasant topic to discuss anymore, but Dave always has great insight, and most importantly, I hope he inspired you to vote in November. And with that, we hope you're enjoying the Guns Magazine podcast. Please tell all your friends, even those mindless liberals. Guns Magazine is #1 in the business, and we're using our decades of friendships to bring you the most interesting chats in the gun world. If you've got questions, comments, or a guest you'd like to recommend for the show, please email me. That's editor@gunsmagazine.com. Make sure you don't miss out on anything by subscribing to us on your favorite podcast directory and YouTube. Of course, you can always listen and download our episodes at gunsmagazine.com, and while you're at it, don't forget to check out our sister publication, American Handgunner magazine, at americanhandgunner.com. Even better, it's not a bad idea to support firearms journalism by subscribing to one or both of our print magazines. And finally, I'd like to remind you to check out our sponsor and good friend, Kimber Firearms, at kimberamerica.com. That's it for this episode of the Guns Magazine podcast. For the entire staff at FMG Publications, I'm Guns Magazine editor Brent Wheat. Now get out there, get voting, and get shooting.